Welcome to the AV1611 hour. My name is Nelson Turner. This broadcast is dedicated to the King James Bible, the Word of God in the English language, to all English speakers worldwide. Today I want to preach on the topic of a little maid. A little maid. You know what little means, right? It means small, diminutive. And a maid is a little girl. Maybe not quite a woman, maybe a teenager. She's a little maid. And there's also an implication in the phrase, a little maid, of purity there. Because maids or maidens are not the same as women that have known men, from what I can gather. That's my understanding of it. Now, first I want you to turn to Romans chapter 1, verse 17. We're going to speak about a little maid, but I want to give a little background on the little maid and what she did, how she did it, and according to the scriptural rules that delineate the transmission of the faith, how she was used. Romans chapter 1, verse 17. And of course, right after this, a few verses later, occur that list of sins that men do against God, that in the New Testament are sins against God to this very day. You can look those up for yourselves, but manslayers and people like that are listed. I won't go into all of them. Abusers of themselves with mankind are mentioned in there as well. There's a bunch of different things mentioned in there. But Romans 1, verse 17, for therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. Now, Paul the Apostle describes in one verse the means whereby the gospel spreads and men are saved. This is the ordinary means whereby people come to be born again. Someone with faith communicates to them, and in that communication, which includes the Word of God, that person receives faith. The very righteousness of God, and I might add the knowledge of the unrighteousness of man, is revealed from one filled with faith to another who will be filled with faith. The Lord reveals to us our own sinfulness and His own righteousness through faith, that is, through belief in His Word. Because if you believe the Bible, before you can really trust Christ as your Savior, you must believe what it says about you as a sinner. And that's where men have a problem. That's where men go off half-cocked and go crazy. What do you mean I'm a sinner? I'm just as good as anybody else. I've been around many years, and I've done good works. I've donated money to charities. I've been baptized. I'm a member of a church. I don't hurt anybody and I don't lie to anybody. Yeah, well, you're still going to hell without Jesus Christ. That's what it is. If you're trusting your works, you're damned already because you've not trusted on the only begotten Son of God. You haven't believed in Him. But the Lord reveals to the sinner first his own sinfulness. And once he becomes thoroughly convinced and humble and contrite and heartbroken and distressed beyond anything they've ever known for their sin, then they can come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. When I started reading my Bible, what I found was that no matter how I tried to do good, I couldn't do good. And that everything the Bible said I should be, I wasn't. And everything the Bible said I shouldn't be, I was. There was no way out but Jesus. There was no way out but going to that place of sacrifice and acknowledging that it's the blood alone that cleanseth from all sin. And knowing and believing that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that He's risen from the dead, that He's resurrected from the dead, and death hath no more dominion over Him. The Lord reveals to us our own sinfulness and His own righteousness through faith. This is the sovereign acting out of God's plan to redeem and call out from among the corrupt sons and daughters of men a people for Himself, a holy people, a holy church, without spot, blemish, or wrinkle. This is the ordinary means, the common means, whereby Jesus reveals Himself to men. We might indeed say that the transmission of faith occurs through the transmission of God's Word. It's the incorruptible seed of the Word of God, which liveth and abideth forever, 1 Peter 1:23. That's why the King's English is so important. It's the incorruptible seed, not the underlying Greek text, though it is, but the King's English is the incorruptible seed of the word of God, which liveth and abideth forever. I'm not an idolater, but I am a member of a cult. I'm a member of the cult of Jesus Christ. And the word was with us. That's what the apostle said. The word was with us, and we've partaken, and so forth. In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. Jesus Christ is the incorruptible word of God, which liveth and abideth forever. And so I have a representation of Jesus. Who do you think was ministering to the Israelites in the Old Testament? The rock that followed them was Christ. Who was that in Judges chapter 5? That came as the captain of the Lord of hosts, who Joshua spoke to, and he was told to take the shoes from off his feet, for the ground on which he stood was holy. That was Christ, pre-incarnate Christ. He appeared to these men in the Old Testament in various forms. He appeared to Abram in chapter 18, Abraham, either way you want to call him, and he recognized that it was the Lord. He came as a man, but he was the Lord. Now, the word of God effectuates what the king has purposed for it and prospers in the thing whereto he has sent it. Jesus is the author and finisher of our faith. We can all agree with that. The faith that he possessed in his divine mission and purpose was communicated by him to his apostles, save Judas, and many others I might add, and they subsequently went everywhere preaching the word of God. Those that believed were saved by grace through faith. It was not of themselves, it was a gift of God, so that men might glorify the Lord and none other. Now, Paul refers in Romans 1:17 to Habakkuk 2:4. The just shall live by his faith. Christ, in Acts chapter 7, it's spoken of him, and it says the coming of the just one with a capital J and a capital O. He's called the just one. And in the Old Testament, it says the just. Who is the just but Christ? The just shall live by his faith. Well, guess what? A just man, one that's justified, lives by faith. But he's been justified by the just one. He's been made righteous as though he'd never sinned in the sight of God. As if he'd never sinned. That's how God views us. As if we'd never sinned. That we're completely pure, holy, and righteous in his sight. That does not mean God's Spirit does still not convince us of sin. He does. When we sin, he urges us and draws us to repentance. So, this phrase, the just shall live by faith, or his faith, occurs in two other places in Paul's epistles. So that's 3 times altogether, once for the Father, once for the Son, once for the Holy Ghost. Salvation in the Old Testament is one of a piece with that in the New Testament. You'll find out if you read Job closely, and you ought to be reading the Bible closely. You ought to be reading it closely every day. I'm going to admonish you to do that. You either read it or listen to it and study it every day. Reading has its purpose. Listening has its purpose. Sometimes you'll hear in listening to the scriptures things that you wouldn't know when you look at the Bible. And some of you, I know, have trouble reading at great length. It's just not something you by nature enjoy doing. It's something I by nature enjoy doing. Some of you are very good at other things and do them by nature. But I was raised and taught to read and read constantly, and it's the only thing that calmed me down when I was a little maniac about 6 years old. So I started reading and I never stopped, and I still haven't stopped to this day. And currently convalescing and waiting for some changes in my physical health. I've done plenty of reading from a large variety of sources, and I've done plenty of meditation on the Word of God every morning. And it's a real pleasure to get up and give your day to God by interfacing with his Word. Men were justified in the Old Testament by faith in God, not by the blood of goats and bulls, which could never take away sin. It is the living faith from the living God that stirs up men to lay hold of eternal life. God gets the glory for our salvation. We don't say, well, when I finally laid hold of Christ and got saved, we say, he laid hold of me and I was born again. He put his hand on me because I couldn't put my leprous hand on him. And that will relate to another part of the sermon shortly. You're unclean. You can't come to Jesus Christ except he draw you. And if he draw you, while he's drawing you, he cleanses you. And he works in your being with an inner unction to want to come to him, to want to love him, to want to serve him, and to see that you can't do it without his moving upon you. It's all of God in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. Salvation is of who? Is it of Brother Bobby? Sister Lauren? No, salvation is of the Lord. So boasting is excluded by the law of faith. Faith is a law as well. Now, the just shall live by his faith. The Old Testament is filled with narratives of men and women who were justified by faith that had sources outside themselves and was channeled to them by the Lord of all the earth. We will look today to the uplifting and happy story. That's what all these people in the big churches want, don't they? Is an uplifting and happy story. So I have one for them here today. It's the uplifting and happy story of an alien. That's a foreigner. What's someone who's foreign from your country and was raised in another country and speaks the language of another country? They're an alien. What does Paul say the Israelites did in the Old Testament when alien armies came in? They put the aliens to flight. That has some relevance today. Hello? Is there anybody out there that believes the Bible? Anywhere? Is there any preacher anywhere that will say that? The aliens that came into Israel and attacked Israel, wanted to destroy it and supplant Israel's culture and religion with their own culture and religion, Israel fought against them. And even when they were subjected to them, God would raise up deliverers or saviors that wrought great deliverance in Israel. You remember Samson? He had some problems. He has what preachers will call zipper trouble. But you know what? God used him still to kill a bunch of Philistines that were lording it over God's people. God has a habit of raising up deliverers and setting them to his people and bringing them forth that they might have pasture and that they might live. So we're going to look at this uplifting and happy story of an alien leper who not only was cleansed from his disease by faith, but was cleansed from his sins by the sovereign act of Jesus Christ. What good does it do a man if he's a leper, if he gets cleansed from his leprosy physically, but doesn't get cleansed from the leprosy of sin? What good does it do you to be healthy in this world when you're not going to be healthy in the next? So, 2 Kings chapter 5, if you want to turn there. This is my AV1611 facsimile King James Bible. And I'm going to read from it because even though some of the spellings are different, I can read from it and show forth very clearly that it's absolutely the same as the King James Bible you possess in your hand. And if it's not, it's because of typo errors. And if it's not precisely the same, it's because of some spellings. But the Spirit is the same. The Spirit in the Bible I just had and this Bible is the same. Someone tried to convince me otherwise. I don't believe it. God's not a legalist in that sense. But I'll tell you what, if you want to get a new King James Bible, the Spirit's not the same. If you want to get a new international version, the Spirit's not the same. Just like in these Methodist, UCC, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, Anglican churches, the Spirit's not the same when the book's not the same. If it's the same book that God gave, then there's going to be a godly spirit present there to some degree, even if it's quenched or grieved. But when the word's not there, who else isn't there? Jesus isn't there either. Now, 2 Kings 5:1. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master. His master was the king of Syria, and honorable because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. Syria had been given deliverance from aliens that were seeking to take it over. Alien armies were coming in, and Naaman was the general, actually. He was the ruler over the army, the general, the main dude, so some of you can understand it. And he brought deliverance for his country. Typically, that's what normal nations do. They honor and hold in high esteem those that deliver their country from evil, those that stop aliens from invading them. And typically, nations that have traitors and apostates to their country and to their religion, selling out the nation and bringing in armies of aliens, are despised and hated by an honest, upright, faith and truth-loving people. This is a stunning picture, though, here in 2 Kings 5:1 of man at his best. Naaman was captain of the host of Syria. He was a man great with his master. He was honorable, and he had wrought many victories and delivered Syria from enemies, and he was a man filled with valor. But, then there's that but. In 3 sad words, he was a leper. This is a picture of a man who's got self-righteousness but no God-righteousness. It's a picture of a man who, despite all of his mighty deeds, couldn't fellowship with his own people without contaminating them with his disease. That's the picture of a sinner as well. Naaman was the general of Syria's army and had done exploits and won victories. He was courageous in the execution of his duties, which won him the king's favor. But our text is explicit in describing the glory for the deliverance of Syria from its enemies as the work of the Lord, because by him the Lord had given deliverance. Does God care for heathen peoples and heathen countries? Oh, yes, he does. Right there it is. God chose one man and used him to deliver the pagan, idolatrous Syrians from the hands of their enemies. God wants people to stay in the nation they're in. And if they intermingle, that's fine, but they need to assimilate to one or the other. When I say intermingle, I mean intermarry. God's plan, Acts 17, is he set the bounds of the habitation of the nations. There are boundaries for the habitations of the nations, and they need to be observed. God's plan is not to have the whole world be one Tower of Babel with everybody all mixed up, all speaking different tongues and working together to build an earth and a world without Christ. Chapter 11. I preached a sermon a long time. Chapter 11 of Genesis. I called it Chapter 11 Bankruptcy. And that's why the Methodists, the UCC, some of the Southern Baptists, and the rest of these denominations are completely ineffective. Years ago, they joined the World Council of Churches, and they came under the UN umbrella. We don't need a United Nations. Anytime the nations are united, it's always against God. We need separate individual nations so that people can seek after the Lord if they are happily so inclined. Now, Naaman was honored in his nation and of great repute. He had a name, but he was a leper and thus unable to enjoy the fruits of his labors. He couldn't walk in public. He couldn't go touch things. He had to stay away from everybody else. His disease made his appearance loathsome and made him personally a danger to others. This is a picture of a sinner who is not only himself unclean and corrupt, but by mere association can infect others with an incurable pollution. That's indeed what I was. I didn't just take pleasure in sin. I took pleasure in those that did the same. I sought to lead others along in my rotten way. 2 Kings 5:2. And the Syrians had gone out by companies, that's in their units, their combat units, and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She's a little maid, and what did they do? They took her captive as a spoil of war. She became a slave, and she was given to Naaman's wife to wait on her and serve her. Isn't that strange how the Lord worked it out, though? This little maid wasn't given to anybody else. She wasn't made a prostitute in Syria, which, well, she could have been. No, instead, she's given to the general's wife to wait on her and serve her. So an Israelite who believed in God and believed in the power of God as revealed in the prophet Elisha was taken captive by the Syrians. By divine appointment, she ends up being a servant unto Naaman's wife. Her faith in the power of the God of Israel present in his prophet is communicated to others. She is giving witness and testimony that the God of Israel is above all gods and that he is able to cure incurable diseases. She believes that nothing is too hard for the Lord. She understands that the Lord is all-powerful and that even her own circumstances of servitude were from the hand of God. Would to God mankind would recognize that whatever position of servitude, bondage, whatever you're in, it comes through the hands of the Lord. And if you get deliverance from that servitude or from that bondage, it's not by your own work, it's by God's work. So 2 Kings 5:3, and she said unto her mistress, she knew of Naaman's leprosy, so she says to Naaman's wife, would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. She believed that a man of God in Israel could just look or wave his hand or command a leper to be clean, and the leper would be clean. Now let me ask you a question. I'm assuming you have a pretty good knowledge of the New Testament, but who did that in the New Testament first and foremost? Who cleansed the lepers? The Lord Jesus Christ. And Elisha is a picture of Christ cleansing the lepers. He foreshadows the great one, the Almighty that was to come. The words of the little maid are instructive as to her circumstances and treatment. She desires the well-being of her Lord and owner. She wasn't trying to escape or run away. She's working for Naaman's wife, and she wishes well to not just Naaman, but to his wife too. Because if Naaman's wife wasn't a leper, that must have made things pretty rough in the household, wouldn't you think? And her exposition of faith that was intended for Naaman's wife was overheard by others. When we witness to one person in the presence of others, we never know what God might do. Someone might overhear you. The person you're speaking to might not get anything out of it, but the person that overhears you witnessing or speaking of the Lord to someone else may get something themselves and may even get saved from it. The faith of one little maid, a woman who had been taken captive and was a slave, is here recorded in God's holy writ for all time and eternity. Hey, someday I'm going to meet her, so are you. Neither the lowly station or obscurity of a believing soul is an impediment to the Lord to do great and mighty things. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 26 and 27. For ye see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God hath chosen me, that's the foolish things of the world, to confound the wise. And God hath chosen me, that is, the weak things of the world, to confound the things which are mighty, to bring the things which are mighty to naught. The Lord delights in stooping down and taking the basest of people, the most humble, the most out of the way, and insignificant people, saving them and using them for his own glory. The testimony of one person can result in the salvation of hundreds. One seemingly small act of faithfulness to God can result in a chain of events that lead to the blessing of others for hundreds of years. Hundreds and hundreds of years. You individuals sitting here hearing my voice live right now, one of you may weep, may speak, or may quote the word of God to somebody else, and that may have an effect greater than everything I've ever done in preaching the word of God. You have no idea what God might use you to do. But if he's going to use you, it's because you put yourself in a position of faithfulness and you're bold to speak God's word with much contention, as Paul did. We ought to remember that every word we speak and everything we do sends ripples to the very edges of eternity. It has consequence. Do you have friends? You have loved ones you never witnessed to? You have people that don't even know you're a Christian and you work with them? How can that be? They should either know by your deportment, by your conversation, or by the very words that you speak. Conversation, I mean by your manner of life. 2 Kings 5, verse 4. And one went in and told his Lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid that is the land of Israel. Naaman was told this, and a word got back to the king. The faithful words of a slave girl end up being carried to the king of Syria. When he hears, he believes the words enough to act upon them directly. The heathen king, that is the Israelite king, hearing a secondhand, I'm mixed up. There is a heathen king, but the heathen king is not really the Syrian. Though he is a heathen, he immediately believes what he heard. Does that mean he was saved? I don't know. But I know one thing, he sent his general to get healed by a prophet of the true and living God. So that speaks a lot for that heathen king. And then when he interacts and sends a letter to the king of Israel, the king of Israel demonstrates that he is a heathen king. Someone that was supposed to be one of God's people wasn't God's people, of God's people. And then someone that shouldn't have had any faith seemed to have had a faith to believe that a prophet in another country could heal his general. Now, he has faith enough to send Naaman to Israel with a pile of money and some fancy clothes to the unbelieving king of Israel, requesting that Naaman be healed. International politics become entwined with personal faith. Just as infidelity in rulers produces evil, so faith in the same will produce good. The king commands Naaman to go to the king of Israel and demand that Naaman be cleansed of his disease. 2 Kings 5:5-7. And the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed and took him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold and 10 changes of raiment. And I believe that he being king, he made sure, he said, you get the best you can find. Pick the best clothes you can find. He's sending along a bribe. He thinks that he can buy the grace of God. He thinks that he can buy the power of God to heal Naaman possibly. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now, when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. Can you imagine if someone walked up to you and said, Can you heal me of this leprosy? I have a little brother that's got leprosy. Could you come to our house and heal him? What are you going to say? The only person that could do that is Jesus. Well, the heathen king that was the king of Israel didn't say that. And it came to pass when the king of Israel had read the letter that he rent his clothes. He tore his clothes. Now, what does that mean? That's emblematic of grief, of extreme concern, of worry and fear. And typically, the Israelites would take a knife, holding the blade downward, and give the upper garment a cut on the right side, and then rend it a hand's breadth. This is done for the 5 following relations: brother, sister, son, daughter, or wife. But for father and mother, the rent is on the left side and in all the garments. That's what I found in studying a book that was written on Oriental customs. But the kings of Israel also rent their garments when there was offense given against the God of Israel, and when there was offense given them, or when they were extremely concerned and thought they were doomed themselves. So King Jehoram supposes that the letter sent from the king of Syria is an attempt to provoke a war. Tears his clothes up. Now, whatsoever is done in the king's chamber in private will be noised abroad in public. We have an example of that here in the United States, but I know that particularly from working for a prince. And working for a prince, what was done in private would be known in public. The king has all kinds of servants around him. They talk. I mean, some of these courts, back in the day of the monarchies, I mean, Henry VIII could be serving over 1,000 people at one meal. And the meal could go on for 7 or 8 hours. They had sometimes 1,000 cooks, 1,200 people servicing another 1,000 or even more. So there's all these people around. And what do people talk? Boy, do they talk. They just talk all the time. They like to run and tell something they heard. They like to just talk. And it doesn't have to be about themselves. It could be about something they saw or happened. Or, hey, did you hear? You can count on one thing. People are gossips. You might have a whole room full of faithful people, but there'll be one gossip in the midst of them. And that gossip will go share it all. So somebody gossiped and said, hey, did you hear what happened? The king tore his clothes up. He's all upset. We might have a war. He's afraid we're going to get invaded. And verse 8, though. But when it was so, Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes. Word got to him that he sent to the king. He went and sent to the king then. He sent one of his servants to the king. Hey, he had servants. Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? His servant may have been Gehazi. It may have been somebody else. Wherefore thou hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me. Let the Syrian Naaman come to me. Let this leper come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. Elisha sees the hand of God in these doings and knows what the Lord intends to do. Sometimes God gives his people a sure knowledge of things yet to come and shows them what he's purposed for them and others. His messenger goes to Naaman to get Naaman to come to his house. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elijah. He shows a proper respect. He doesn't presume to knock on the door and go in. Naaman does what is asked of him and comes to the house in obedience. And Elisha sent a messenger on to him. I want you to think about this. Elisha didn't go out himself, but he sent a messenger on to him. Again, Elisha's a type of Christ. Christ often didn't go, and there's times in the New Testament when you can find where Christ didn't go to where the sick person was. He just said the word and the sick person was healed. Remember the centurion, I'm not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but I'm a man under authority. When I say to a man, go, he goes. When I say to a man, come, and he comes. So I know if you just speak the word, my servant shall be healed. And the servant was healed without the Lord even physically being in his presence. So Elisha sent a messenger unto Naaman, saying, go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. There's more there to meets the eye, but I don't have time to go into it. The number 7 is significant of something as well. There's 7 spirits of God in the Bible, you find. And that there's one Spirit of God, but there's also 7 spirits of God. And they come forth from the triune God and go out to work God's work in the earth. And in particular, certain people. Elisha is a type of Christ cleansing the lepers. He does not need to have personal contact. Christ, when he healed the 10 lepers, didn't have personal contact with them. And 1 or 2 came back to give him glory, but the rest went on their way healed. They were only healed physically, though, not spiritually. So Naaman, when he hears this, he was wroth. He was angry and went away and said, behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. Naaman takes offense that Elisha did not come out and see him personally because, after all, he's a general. He's got notoriety. He's a man of valor. He's esteemed. Well, the Lord esteems all men the same in the end. And all men of high degree are altogether a lie, and men of low degree, it doesn't matter. We're all the same in God's eyes. We need to be cleansed of our sin. We need to be saved. We need to be washed in the blood. And when we are, then we're fit to come into his presence. And then we're also made equipped and efficient to go out and tell others. But Naaman thought this is ridiculous. His expectations weren't met. And we often find that's our way is not God's way. Our expectations are not in line with what the Lord has planned. And only in the end of a matter do we see that God's way is better. I can say that about getting COVID. God's way is better. I would have rather not had it, but it was God's plan that I have it. Or not have it, but had it. In verse 12, 2 Kings 5:12. And are not Abner, Abana, and Pharpar rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. He's infuriated that his position and the man of dignity that he is does not get any respect from the prophet of Israel. He's used to commanding people, and he goes away angry when he's commanded. Takes some of his own people to speak to him, to get him to calm down and do as he's told. Calm down and do as you're told. Isn't that what parents say to children? That's what you might have to say to a student in a school. 2 Kings 5:13. And his servants came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? Naaman cannot see any difference between the Jordan and the rivers of his own. He thinks the rivers in his own country are better than the rivers in Israel. I guess he's going to find out different. He probably thought the religion of his own country was just as good as the religion of Israel. He's going to find out difference. There's not a pantheon in Christianity. We have one Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. One Lord, one faith, one baptism. The Lord, our God, he is the Lord. So, he went down at the urging of his servants and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan. See, you have to have humility. You have to be willing to humble yourself and have a contrite spirit to be saved. So he humbled himself and listened to his servants, went down and he did what the man of God said, According to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child. Not only did his flesh come upon him good, he had better flesh than if he would have been a man his own age with normal flesh. It was a child's flesh. Whatever nationality he was. God is no respecter of persons with nationalities either, is he? No. We don't preach any racial hatred here. We preach there's one Lord, one faith, one baptism for all that believe. Whoever's daddy they belong to, whoever was their father. So obedience to the spoken word of God, and by that Naaman is cleansed. If he had washed himself in one of the other rivers, his leprosy would not have departed. And he returned to the man of God and all his company, and came and stood before him, and he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. Here, I want to give you a payment for the Spirit of God doing the work of God on me. And he was regenerated then too. Why do I know that? There is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Don't you know that, Christian? He knew the same thing you know right now. But Elisha turns down the money. He said, As the Lord liveth before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Naaman, in gratitude, returns to Elisha. He seeks to give Elisha the money and fancy clothes. Elisha refuses to take money from him, unlike so many of the modern prophets. There's a passage in Micah. You don't need to turn there, but I'm going to read it. These modern supposed prophets, they build up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. That's Micah 3:10 through 11. The heads thereof judge for reward. The heads of Israel took bribes, and the priests thereof taught for hire. That's something, when you get a professional preacher and they get paid to do it, if their heart's not right with God, their eyes are going to be on the plate instead of on the people. They're not going to be worried about the health of God's sheep, God's people. They're going to be worried about the health of the offering. How big is the offering? And those are the ones that teach for hire. And the prophets thereof divine for money. This is a charismatic revival meeting right there. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, Is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. That's exactly what they say at this day. We're the Lord's people. We're doing everything wrong against the Bible, but God's still with us and God's going to bless us. No, that's not the way it is. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules burdens of earth? For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. Do you need any more proof of his conversion? Not just was his leprosy cleansed, he was cleansed of his sin. And he's a powerful man. He's a general. What happened when the general that was a leper went back? I'll bet the first thing that he did was thank that little maid. And I'll bet that he told everybody, and I bet that everybody knew because all of his servants were gossips. And he believed in the Lord God Almighty, and he asked the man of God a favor. He said, In this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. That's in his political and in his martial office, in his military office. He has to go into a pagan house of worship with the king, and he has to go through the formalities. God pardoned him. He said, the man of God said, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. Sometimes, and I could probably think of examples or give examples from all the books I've read, of something may not be in your heart, but you might have to do it in your flesh. He was pardoned for that thing. In other words, when he bowed down, the Lord saw he's not bowing down to Rimmon, he's bowing down to me. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of you Christians do that. And a real early tenet of the faith was that you'd have no other gods but the Lord Almighty. So if you were bid to do sacrifice to Caesar, instead you would make a sacrifice of yourself by refusing. But here we have the story, the wonderful testimony of someone, a little maid, whom God chose not even to give us the name of. And she's famous in the Bible because of her faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, in the way of salvation, in the God of Israel. She'll be famous forever. Heavenly Father, I thank thee for this day. I thank thee for thy word, that it's had free course.